So I'm going to move on now, and I'm delighted to welcome for our second session a distinguished panel of academic leaders, thought influencers, and mentors for a panel discussion on the Black experience in science and engineering. And I'll let Vic, as the moderator, formally introduce the panel, but I'll just say as a word of introduction that we had an organizational call last week for this panel and became very clear we could have set aside certainly half a day for this rather than the 45 minutes that we have today. Their perspectives based on their own lived experiences shine an invaluable light on the realities that still exist despite generations of words and actions that have been meant to change that. We sincerely hope our guests will see this as just the beginning of a conversation. One request that will hopefully improve the viewing experience for those watching on YouTube, since this is a panel discussion, is for everyone on Zoom, except our panelists and except Vic and me, to stop your video during the panel discussion. That way we can focus on the panel. And then I'll ask the board members to turn your videos back on as we get to the Q&A session. Vic or I will ask you. So thank you for that. Vic, I will hand the floor to you to introduce the panelists and proceed.
Thank you, Ellen. And good afternoon, everyone, and on all our participants on YouTube. And welcome to our plenary panel discussion on framing Black experiences in science and engineering. And before I introduce our panelists, I will remind everyone, as Ellen has said, to please stop your video. And I would ask you all to hold your questions and mute your mics until we get to the question and answer portion of this session. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We first have William Jackson, Distinguished Research and Emeritus Professor of Chemistry at the University of California, Davis, and previously the Professor of Chemistry and Physics. He was a university professor, or what they call the Professor of the University at Howard University, and was one of the founding members of the National Organization for the Professional Advancement of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers, NOBCHE. Stephanie Page, Community Engagement Manager at the Advanced Resource and Coordination Network and creator of #Black and STEM, which is enormously popular and a virtual community and safe space for Black scientists. Stephon Alexander, who's a professor of physics at Brown University and the current president of the National Society of Black Physicists. Eugene DeLoatch, Dean Emeritus of the Clarence Mitchell School of Engineering at the Morgan State University, and he was the 2019 recipient of the National Science Board's Public Service Award. And finally, Kelly Mack, former program director for NSF's Advanced Program, co-founder and chair of the Society of STEM Women of Color, and current vice president for undergraduate STEM education and executive director of Project Kaleidoscope at the Association of American Colleges and Universities. I want to thank all of our distinguished panelists for being here today, and we really look forward to your opinions. In 1944, in Vannevar Bush, The Endless Frontier, he wrote, "There are talented individuals in every segment of the population, but with few exceptions, those without the means of buying higher education go without it. Here is a tremendous waste of the greatest resource of our nation, the intelligence of its citizens." Despite this recognition by Bush, our nation's HBCUs were not part of Bush's vision, even though leading researchers like Carver were at Tuskegee University or Charles Drew at Howard University, as well as the likes of people like Percy Julian, were making innovative discoveries. Federal and state laws failed to invest equitably, as Dr. Rankins has previously pointed out, in these institutions and the talent that comes from them. While things have improved, we know it's not enough and that we're missing millions of talented scientists and engineers. At every level in our sector of the science and engineering ecosystem, racial inequities remain. So for each of the speakers, I will give you this question, and I would like you to take 5 minutes to be cognizant of every other panelist and the time, and to have time at the end for Q&A of this one question. And I'd like it from your perspective, as well as a recommendation that our board members, as well as those from NSF and others, can take with it. So, as stated in NSB's Vision 2030 report, to achieve proportionate representation by 2030, the number of Black people in the science and engineering workforce must more than double over the next 10 years. Based on your experience and unique perspectives, what do you think NSB and NSF should do over the next 10 years to make science and engineering research enterprise an attractive and welcoming environment for Black people? And what should success look like for you? And I'm going to start with Bill Jackson. Bill, I'd like you to start. We've just heard about NSF HBCU programs, which you had a hand in creating, as well as the HSI programs back in the 70s, initiated by your testimony before Congress and Senator Ted Kennedy in 1976, advocating for more funding for underrepresented minorities in science and engineering. Based on your history and what you've heard today, what do we need to do to move forward toward full representation of Black people in science and engineering by 2030, and to carry out what this board has stand behind in terms of Vision 2030? Bill, you have 5 minutes.
First, let me give you a quick review of my experience. I have been active in all parts of the scientific and engineering enterprise in this country. I've worked in industry, the federal government, HBCU, Howard University, and UC Davis. Thus, I have had a background that would allow me to have some perspective of what goes on. I would say that you have a daunting task to raise the number of active participants in the science and engineering enterprise in 10 years by a factor of roughly 3, rather than what you've done in the past 50 years, a factor of 2, from 2% to maybe 4%, depending upon how you calculate it. You've already heard about HBCUs and what I would call the pitiful support for those institutions. A university that should have been in the top 10 of the universities in this country was Howard University. This is a university that is directly funded by the federal government. When you compare it to UC Davis, when they had roughly the same number of students, 12,000 for Howard University, 14,000 for UC Davis, the funding for UC Davis was twice that of Howard University. And it was actually worse than that, since capital costs at a UC campus are not considered in their basic budget. Thus, Howard University was being asked to do the same kind of job UC Davis was doing on less than 50% on the dollar. I mean, this is abysmal. There is a story that the vice president came over and looked at Howard University. This was in the 70s when the vice president was from Minnesota and saw what was going on, and tears came to his eyes. What we need is more support funding for HBCUs. We need predominantly white institutions to hire more African-American faculty so that they can serve as mentors. They say they can't find them. It has been my experience, they don't try hard enough. Finally, we need faculty at the PWI institutions who are sensitive and respectful of African-American students. You can get them to do better if you bring them and treat them like people should be treated. That means listening to them and have respect for their ideas, just like you have respect for your white students' ideas. I think that's about all the time I have for a discussion, as was pointed out, could last for a whole day. Thank you. I can't hear you, Victor.
Bill, I say I appreciate your candor and thank you for your comments. Stephanie, I'd like to turn to you. With your unique perspective in community engagement, you have your finger on the pulse of so many Black scientists and engineers, especially young people, activating their collective voices and pushing for change. What do you think we should do over these next 10 years to achieve full representation? And what does success look like to you?
Thank you. I thought a lot about this question and really what could I possibly say to complement Dr. Rankins and Dr. Jackson and to really give voice, not just to myself, but to so many people out there who, you know, we're either in the process of pursuing careers or pursuing education and training. And so what I tried to do was prepare a statement that would take about 2 minutes, and then, but to kind of highlight some parts where I'm speaking from my head and my heart on this. So I'll start with what I prepared. And basically, which centers on the fact that to have a goal of at least doubling the number of Black folk in the science and engineering workforce, it has to take into account far more than representation. These numbers represent Black people, you know, who must pursue our education and our careers in spite of deeply embedded racism. Pursuing STEM education and careers, it means essentially taking on a secondary career of being Black while you're doing it. We cannot also overlook, you know, Black women, disabled folks, gender nonconforming, trans folks, et cetera. That there are Black folk who occupy overlapping identities and social stratifications that place them in unique positions to endure unique marginalization. And as NSB and NSF pursues action items, we must, for example, ensure that experiences and needs of Black women and Black trans men and women are integrated into the policies addressing gender inequity, sexual assault and sexual harassment, for example. We cannot allow these perspectives and experiences to go unheard and unaddressed, and without the consideration of the uniqueness of, you know, having race as a part of your identity and your social stratification. We must dismantle the status quos and cultures that reinforce racialized and patriarchal power structures that work against entry, retention, and progress of Black folk. It's not enough to let more of us in. We must see a structural change. Black folks should not have to assimilate. We should not have to adopt the same power structures, social power structures. We should not have to commit the same harms or leverage the vulnerability of others in order to find success in STEM career paths, right? So we should not be expected or held to adjust and adapt in an environment and essentially take on those behaviors in order to be successful. Over the next 10 years, each and every action plan of the NSF must intentionally take into account the sociological psychological expertise on intersectionality because it's there, and on inequity and merit assessment because it's there, and so forth and so on. Over the next 10 years, NSB and NSF must hold itself, the institutions, the programs, the individuals it funds accountable for being anti-racist. And, you know, to really be personal about what success looks like for me, I have a child who is saying that they want to pursue a science and engineering degree. My child might end up with 6 PhDs like Sam Beckett on Quantum Leap. But what success would ultimately look like is for him and others in his generation to be able to pursue their dreams and not repeat the experiences that are reflected in those of us on this panel. When I think about being able to speak with a Dr. Jackson and the reality that we have overlapping experiences, even though we reflect, generations in between, that's unacceptable. And, when I think about particularly my role with ARC, an NSF funded initiative, the fact that we're unique because we integrate the framework of intersectionality and other sociological frameworks into pursuing STEM equity and supporting STEM equity in a systemic and sustained way. I want to point out too, like what it means to really ensure the sustainability of programs and initiatives like ARC and like some of the other advanced programs that are really working to both coalesce the research, to support the research on the sociological issues around STEM equity, and also looking at how to translate that into practice and so that we can see longstanding impact. These are all things that to me are inextricably linked. And so, the biggest piece that I think about over the next 10 years is how do we evaluate success? So for example, I am a graduate of a wonderful HBCU, North Carolina A&T State University, that we've heard mentioned already. I went on to earn my PhD at the University of North Carolina in biochemistry and biophysics. And what I saw was UNC highlighting its expanded representation at the undergraduate and graduate level, and even at the postdoctoral level. But for all of this success, what I did not see was UNC turn around and utilize the populations that they had educated and trained, and then translate that into faculty positions and faculty leadership positions and institutional administration positions. That is, to me, a point of accountability that I want to see addressed over the next 10 years. If you can educate and train us, why are you not placing us in positions as faculty and leaders of research in your own institutions? So thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's really powerful. And we appreciate those words of wisdom. And I hope our board members and everybody's listening and taking down these things as we go forward. Stephon, the same question from your perspective as a professor at an Ivy League institution and as president of the National Society for Black Physicists, what do you believe needs to happen to make the science and engineering enterprise more equitable for Black people?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I really appreciated what Stephanie had to say. Really resonated with her words. So in a nutshell, I'm going to speak from a perspective where I feel it can be impactful in terms of my experiences. So just for the record, I grew up in the Bronx, New York. I'm a proud product of the New York City public school system, and still actually very involved in work out there as now the director of the Harlem Gallery of Science. And speaking from that, I've been very fortunate throughout, my short career. I was a recipient of an REU award when I was an undergraduate. And then later on, after much effort, a career award from the NSF. So I can, so I have some of that experience. I've also served on panels in the NSF for physics, for my field. So from that kind of broad experience, I would say there are some really good things that the NSF has engaged with the EPSCoR. By the way, can everyone hear me? I'm using these headphones. Hello?
Yes.
Okay, good. So from that experience, I mean, and as president of NSBP and a member of NSBP, one thing that we are engaged in is we have reignited a lot more student activity. So for example, this summer, with the help of the Simons Foundation, we instituted a summer research program that engaged 28 NSBP student members, half of which are from HBCUs and half of which are from PWIs. And we have about a 50-50 gender split as well. And the reason why that we saw that to be valuable is because when I was an NSBP member as a freshman in college, I went to Haverford College. It was the first time that I engaged and had endured relationships with colleagues and friends over those 30 years from historically Black colleges and universities. And that proven to be very valuable to me. And I think one thing that NSF could maybe really help engage more of programming that basically enhances interactivity between faculty, Black faculty and faculty of color at predominantly white institutions with their colleagues at HBCUs. And we can think about and I'm sure maybe there are already things going on there. Another thing I think in terms of an action item, having sat on panels, just to share a personal story. There was once a time I was on a panel, I won't mention names, and someone basically on that panel in some ways was a kind of attacked in a way that didn't speak to any of the a female applicant's application. And there were two people on that panel, myself included, that basically stood up and basically was able to really speak to that person's research. But I sometimes wonder, if the voices on that panel were not there to sort of speak and speak justice. And the question I have and the recommendation I want to make is to make sure that there's transparency and accountability in terms of who's on those panels. And I want to make a very quick recommendation, maybe these, how oversight happens, whether or not that's internal or an external mechanism, number one. Number two, to make sure that there are on panels, there is representation. And it's not just enough that we have, say, a person of color, a minority person, but exemplar people with a track record of having sensitivity to making sure that practices of bias doesn't happen at the level of panels. And so there's just a general concern and question as to, just from my own personal experience. And I did speak to a number of Black colleagues, by the way, before this discussion, to make sure I wasn't just speaking for myself, that there is a sense that a lot more needs to be done. Make sure that, I'll give you one quick example and maybe a recommendation. There have been, I've heard a generic sense that, if you're an applicant and you're a person of color and you're an applicant and you get back your report from the panel that, there's a resounding positivity, and then there's one review that's negative and you didn't get funded. I think the applicant should have an opportunity before a decision is made to at least be able to defend themselves, because there is a sense and a suspicion that, because of the informality maybe and lack of transparency with the anonymity of the panel, that we have a lot of cases of people who will ordinarily get funded. And a lot of us actually are the ones that are also mentoring and training the next generation of scientists of color, by the way, to make sure that that there's some safeguards to to deal with that. I mean, we can think of future things to do, but for the current matters, I think that there needs to be some protection there as well. So let me just stop there. I think my 5 minutes is way over.
Thank you, Stephon, and we appreciate your comments. There is always a question is, how do we break down these things, these systemic things internally, and how do we make sure that all of our people have 2020 bias training that's not just protective from an EEO point of view, but advances the mission of the agency, and people are brought up to speed, pretty much how they do it in industry. We've got to get up to speed in government. Eugene, you bring a unique perspective, and with your experience creating and leading a school of engineering at an HBCU, you have been credited and have been rightly documented and rewarded because you have the honor of producing more Black engineers at the bachelor's level in this country than any other person in the history of U.S. higher education. What are we missing here? What needs to radically change in order for Black people to fully participate in the science and engineering enterprise? Eugene.
Well, I want to thank you, Vic, and I want to thank the board for this opportunity to join this panel, this distinguished panel. I want to, you just said something that I wanted to lead off with. I happened to have the opportunity, was given the privilege to start an engineering school at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland's largest city. And it was has been a pleasure. And that was back in 1984. And what I did and what is happening at the other 14 places where there are accredited engineering schools in this country on HBCU campuses, they are engineering schools at HBCUs. That's very important to say rather than to say an HBCU engineering school. Now, the other side of that coin is very important, very necessary that I have the best that I can put before the young people who would be coming to us to get their first introduction to and first degree in engineering. When I left school in 1959 with a bachelor's degree in engineering, less than 1% of all the engineering professionals in the United States are Black. I sometimes lecture to the freshman class, and they don't understand that quite in this day. So I tell them, look, line up 100 pennies in front of this room. Take one of them and take out your file. Chisel that down a little bit. And there you have what I represented in a very important sector of employment in this country in 1959. So it's very important that we understand that this nation has grown in a way and is really built on technology and science. I'm not going to touch the science part because I have Bill Jackson here on this panel. I'm not touching that. I'm not going to touch, the physics part either, and certainly I will touch a little bit on the mathematics because engineers are scavengers, and it happens that I made my way to engineering through mathematics. I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics and then a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. But without mathematics and without rubbing shoulders with chemists and physicists and those people, we have no toolbox on which to work with in engineering. So there is no HBCU engineering. There is no US of A engineering. There is only engineering. That's innovation, creative, inventing, whatever that is. But we build that all on the basis of you, Bill Jackson, you, Victor, and on backs of those scientists, those physicists, and so forth. And without them, and without that knowledge base, we can't go forward. We would have one heck of a hodgepodge of whatever was going on. So what I want to say is that this is not a mystery. When I went to Baltimore in 1984, the year before, I looked at the statistics. The year before in Maryland, an interesting state, there were 1,000 bachelor degrees awarded to engineering students in that state. 1984 now, not 1964. And in 84, of that 1,000 students that have received bachelor's degrees in the state of Maryland, where in Baltimore, 80+% of the students were in public schools, were Black. There were 19 degrees awarded by the combination of the University of Maryland, College Park, the Naval Academy, Johns Hopkins University, and Loyola. That was the That was it, 19 out of 1,000. So, it was an easy task for me to build an engineering school and to increase the number of Blacks with engineering degrees out of Maryland. So what I wanted to, Victor, I just want to lay on the table that this is, I occasionally go out, I've been up to Martha's Vineyard, I've been down to Chincoteague and those places. And I've been down there, and I sometimes like to go out on a fishing boat. And I could tell you, some of these captains, they know the seasons. So they'll take you out, and there's sometimes you go out and you get no fish. Well, you can't catch fish where there's no fish. We have to do something about what we have been doing as a nation. It is sad what we've done. We cannot leave these young people in the inner cities behind in this great first generation field of engineering. It's not rocket science. It's just solving the problems that are in front of you and using the toolbox that you need to develop and have in your toolbox. Those courses in chemistry and physics and mathematics and so forth, they're not difficult. They're just things you do because you want to get to your end and your goal. So what I'm saying is here that we need something in this field. And I know the difficulty of using the word F-score. I understand that. I've been around. But we need an F-score kind of thing for minorities in engineering, especially those from the African-American community. I hope there are people on this board that are willing to at least explore that. Take the weight that they've taken on F-score, the way it was done with states and so forth, and all those kind of things, and look at this thing from the standpoint, I don't care where these kids are. I'm just not committed totally to HBCU for that, where they come from. But I know one thing, if I have on my faculty people who can't do that, then they're not going to be there very long. So that's what I would say. I'm interested in seeing that we find a way to increase the pool of African-American and other minority youngsters in engineering. And what I'm going to say here is, it's a little controversial, but it's real. For the last 50 plus years in these United States of America, my home, more than 50% of every doctoral degree awarded in engineering in this country has been awarded to foreign nationals, not people born in this country. And it's still going on, folks. I know some of the money comes with the student, but after a while, some of the faculty start looking askance and they use money that should not be used in that way. So I'm saying to you that if we don't wake up and do the job we have to do, I hear people talking about somebody stealing our technology. No. Those students worked long and hard, 4 and 5 years to get those doctorates. And that's their technology as well as the faculty member who turn it on to it. So let's go with it, guys. If we want to maintain our posture, let's do the right thing and find the funds you need to get these kids in the game.
Thank you, Eugene, for that call to action. I hope our board members heard that and reflect on what you just said. Very important. Turning now to Kelly before we open up the floor for questions from the board. Kelly, you've heard everyone's comments. I'd like you to answer the same question, but I'm particularly interested in your perspective as someone who understands how the National Science Foundation works. You've served as a program director for Advance. You've served as the executive secretary for the Committee on Equal Opportunities in Science and Engineering, or what we call CEOS. What specific recommendations do you have for both NSF and NSB to change the environment and culture of science and engineering to achieve the full representation of Black people?
Thank you, Vic. And thank you also to the board for inviting me to be a part of this really important conversation. First, I'd like to commend the board on its recent statement on racism in science and engineering. The boldness and the bluntness of the language was a soothing balm for my soul and the soul of so many of my colleagues who've been engaged in the work of broadening participation and grown weary in our well-doing. It was also in many ways for us a call for attention. You have our attention now. We see that you are as angry, disheartened, fed up, exhausted, disappointed, exasperated, and as dissatisfied as we have been, especially of late. So to answer your question, how do we come together now, double the numbers of Blacks in science and engineering? And as I would add, also significantly improve the quality of their experiences. I want to echo the sentiments of Dr. Rankins and also my fellow panel members. We are way behind in funding HBCUs, and we have a lot of ground to make up in that regard. We absolutely should be funding the institutions whom this nation is most relying on to educate and train Black STEM students, and we absolutely should be funding them to a degree that matches the expressed concern we have for the ways in which racism in our disciplines has negatively impacted them. And yet money is not the answer to all things. To that end, my answer to the question at hand is as simple as it is complex, which is, please lead us. If a governing board of an agency like NSF has assumed such a bold stance against something as radical as addressing racism in science and engineering and taken on such a daring goal as doubling the number of Black people in science and engineering, then we need you to also take seriously the responsibility of leading us in your word, your deeds, and by example into this new age of discovery, innovation, risk, and reward. So my first recommendation, actually, as strange as it seems, now that we've reached this point, is that we just pause. Let's just take the time necessary to fully understand how we even got to this point and admit to our complicitness in it. Let's not rush to identify and implement quick fix solutions because we know they are too easily undone and always at the mercy of a change in leadership or a shift in priority. If it took us a few centuries to get here, let's assume it will take more than a fiscal year or so to move past here. We owe it to ourselves and those we are most concerned about to grapple with just how deeply pervasive the problem is and how deeply pervasive the problem is at NSF. We must examine, for instance, how and why, just last month, there could be hundreds of Twitter posts and replies from Black and brown PIs quoting verbatim from their own NSF grant reviews, some of the most egregiously racist sentiments, statements, and stereotypes that I've heard in my 25+ year career. We need to examine very carefully how it is that one day I could be invited to meet with this esteemed body. And on another day, just a year ago, I could be invited as a visitor to NSF, asked to assume the position with hands on the table, legs spread apart, patted down from behind like a criminal by a male security officer in the middle of the NSF lobby, while my white colleague who accompanied me that day could do no more than sit and watch it all unfold and silently grieve for me. Because even though her shoes also set off the scanner just like mine did, she was respectfully just asked to remove her shoes and then re-enter the scanner. And there are just too many more stories, more egregious than this, happening every day at all levels outside of and within NSF. So as a leading agency in this work, it's time for us to admit with candor and transparency that we have been complicit in upholding oppressive systems and structures that reign and rule over how we do the business of scientific discovery. My second recommendation is that once we've admitted to and gained a deeper understanding of the ways in which we have contributed to the issues we seek to address, that we gather the very best intelligence we can. What's needed now is a sophisticated system like the dashboard that I heard about earlier for receiving direct, non-social media influenced, anonymous if necessary feedback from our community, as well as from our program and admin staff, and a sophisticated system that allows for responding to that feedback with the same resoluteness that has informed the board's statement on racism. Already other agencies similar to NSF have launched online polls and surveys to ensure that identity is protected, experiences are given consideration, and situations are resolved to the benefit of those most vulnerable. But a word of caution here. We don't always need to, nor should we constantly turn to our Black and brown colleagues for information that potentially compromises their positions and drains their energy. We all now know the trauma that living with COVID-19 brings. A general lack of essentials, day in and day out, constant threat of our demise every time we leave our homes. So the intelligence of and the sensitivity for and sensibility about racism and its impact on science and engineering is rooted in and directly tied to our own individual understandings and experiences with the vulnerabilities that we all now know as new normal life. All we need to do is dare to do what we ask of our students all the time, apply what we've learned. My third recommendation, I'm getting to the end, Vic. My third recommendation is that the National Science Board apply the same level of energy, effort, and resources to an anti-racism media campaign that it intends to apply to promoting Vision 2030. The recent statement of racism has been invaluable, but let's not let that be the last statement. We need a lifelong series of statements from the National Science Board that constantly evolve as we grow and evolve and as our understanding of racism in science and engineering matures. And if I can add just one small caveat here, Vic, and that is perhaps the board would consider that its next statement critique the dominant narrative that wrongfully positions excellence and diversity as being mutually exclusive. Exclusive excellence is not some special or lesser kind of excellence. The two are inextricably linked. And so finally, as our leaders, please challenge us to proactively look for, identify, and interrogate all of the other places where dominance shows up in science and engineering, whether it is in our beliefs that we are keepers of all knowledge and our students must learn it the way we know it, or whether it is in the understandings that we hold of what quality research is and who is capable of doing it. It's a lot, I know, and there's so much more, but time is not on our side today. I'm probably out of time. So I'll simply end here with a very fervent plea for us to truly commit to doing the hard and difficult work, which Frederick Douglass described as being more than transient or fitful work, but as being patient, enduring, honest, unremitting, indefatigable, and into which the whole heart is put. Thank you for your time and attention. It's been my privilege to share my thoughts with you today.
Kelly, thank you for such a moving and eloquent testimony here and a way to end up our panel. As also, I want to say, no one should ever have to go through that experience or humiliation that you did. And I'm sure that the board, and I know our chair, Ellen, and also at NSF, you please accept our apologies on that.
Thank you.
I know I'd like to open this up to the board for the time we have remaining, which is not much, so I ask you to keep your questions short. Board members, please turn your videos back on. If you have a question, please use the hand raise function, which Portia will be monitoring, and wait to be called upon. Once I call upon you, please remember to turn on your microphone before you speak. And I see we have some questions in the queue. And Amelia, you have the first question.
Yes, I'm responding as the chair of the Committee on Oversight, because in fact, of course, one of our most important tasks is to review the merit review process of the NSF and explain how we try to be as fair, as honest, and as straightforward and transparent as possible. I think we're still trying to do that. But in fact, I was very sensitive to the remarks that were made about how NSF does indeed review proposals. I think we are trying desperately hard, and we have made steps towards making that more transparent. As I will discuss later this afternoon, and I recognize that the panel probably have other and more important things to do, but I would explain a little of the merit review process because I have new board members to brief very briefly. I think they will find that going forward, one of our biggest tasks is to examine how the process is working in the matter of broader impacts. It's been pulled out in Vision, as you mentioned earlier. We are actually very conscious that this is an area that is ripe for what shall I say, for improvement, and that's probably an understatement. We have a great deal of work to do there. We have to understand what we can do as we move forward. It might be wonderful if we could talk to some of the people who made the remarks today. I really respected and appreciated them to make sure we're going in the right direction. But I just wanted to say we are aware that this is a profound problem, and we're trying to track it down and to work on it as we go forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that comment. And I'm sure you have folks here as well as other resources that the Committee on Oversight can draw on to help as we try to refine and improve. Jerry, you're next. You have a question?
Yeah, so I just have quick comments to make, both to the board as well as to each of the speakers. Bill, the issue of exemplar, I think, is really important. If there was some way that we could identify faculty that are really good faculty and appreciating the racial issues, as well as how to make a welcoming climate in their department and in their own research group, I think this is critically important for those of us who are on the more senior end of things. And minority students come and say, what if I work for this person to get my PhD? And you can pretty much say, don't go there or do go there if you've been around enough. We need to be able to have some kind of nomination process, something out there that can really identify PIs that students can work for. And I don't know what form it would take. With regards to Stephon, as well as Kelly's comments, I really think NSB has to look very seriously about what is the process by which PI that puts in a grant can report a bias that they've seen, a bias that they've been affected by, in an independent way through a process that's transparent, so that they know they will not get injured by making that concern, if not accusation. And I think we have to seriously understand what that, develop a channel for that. And so I challenge myself and the board to work with NSF to figure out how to put that kind of a process in place, because none of this should be happening. None of this should be happening. Stephanie, to your point about leadership, I think it's important for NSB to get a report from NSF on the demographics of our program officers, to make sure that we have representation from African Americans in our program officers at NSF at all levels, because leadership is incredibly important. Thank you for raising that issue. Gino, the wake up call, boy, a number of us on the board have been pounding the table on this, and we'll pound it along with you. So thank you for that one too. And Callie, you reduced me to tears once again. My admiration for you continues. Thank you for all your incredible suggestions and the impact that you're having yourself. And I hope we'll follow up on many of your recommendations.
Thank you, Jerry. Carl, you have a question for our panelists or a comment?
The answer is yes, I do. I apologize that my video does not work. It says the host has stopped me. And Brad, if you can turn me on, that would be great. Ignoring that part, let me first, Bill, thank you for taking part.
Just been muted, so you better go back on. You're muted, Carl.
Okay, you can hear me now, I think. Yeah, I just didn't push the key hard enough. Okay, I'm not going to get a picture very easily. Anyhow, Bill, we really appreciate. There we go. Yeah, it does allow me. Thank you, Brad. Somehow I got disallowed. You are an inspiration, and I can tell you, I would say one of your above average students was Victor. But you have done a service for so long. And, I look at ways at which we can do something better. I agree with everything that's been said so far, but in a thing that would make Jerry a happy camper, I would point out that it would be, yeah, it would. The research experience for undergraduates is, I think, being still underutilized as a tool at HBCUs. Part of it is that that program needs to have a way to produce some release time for the faculty at such institutions, and to get to show the joy that comes from carrying out research. That's just one more of the many parameters. Kelly, I can't tell you how much it breaks my heart to hear the way you are being treated. And we as a board have to find a way to do what we can to make that statement loudly and clearly. So again, I know others want to speak as well, but the board cares, and we're going to find ways somehow to make the path a little bit smoother. And Bill, thank you for getting us started.
Bill,
we got about 2 minutes. I want to respond to first. I think that the head of NSF should fire the person who did that, period. There is no reason for any woman to be treated like that. I mean, I want to cry, and I'm 80-some years old, and I'm just disgusted. I mean, the idea that, Kelly, also, you spoke more eloquently about some of the problems than anybody, I think, on this panel. There can be things done. At one point, NSF was giving money to any PI who could get an underrepresented minority person in their group. That went away. Why? That was one way to engage the PIs. They respond to money. At UC Davis, when I was chair, and actually, when I was chair, I got money from the Sloan Foundation. As chair, I knew that the university was growing. We needed to increase the number of graduate students because we needed to increase the faculty. As everyone knows, if you have a chemistry department that is a service department for the rest of the university, you need TAs. TAs mean you need graduate students. I doubled the number of graduate students and at the same time increased the number of my underrepresented minority graduate students from 5% to 18%. I could do that with money because money allowed me to go around the country and give extra money for minority students to come to UC Davis and to promise them there would be somebody in the department to mentor them. Not necessarily to be their advisor, because the graduate program should be done not for a particular person, but for your interest. You should be interested in what that person is doing and how you're treated. Now, you need an advocate. Everyone needs an advocate when they're in graduate school. And often, your major advisor is not going to be simpatico with you. Some advisors don't talk well to graduate students. Some graduate students don't talk well to their advisors. So you need people in the department who can do that. We found that when we brought in the minority students under the Sloan program, we graduated 80-some underrepresented minority students and only lost 2. That was better than the success rate of predominantly white students. So all of the ways in which recruitment committees recruit graduate students don't necessarily work. I mean, and we know that. Graduate record exams don't work. Grades don't necessarily work. The best thing might be the recommendations. We made sure that all minority students knew exactly what the criteria were to be accepted to graduate school. You don't have to have a 3.8 average to go to graduate school, not at UC Davis. Maybe you do it at Harvard. But I mean, I don't know about Harvard since they turned me down when I applied. And I don't really care at this point. The other thing is, in terms of undergraduate students at predominantly white institutions, bring them in your lab as freshmen, just so they know what science is about. Pay them so they work in that lab rather than going to work at McDonald's where they're learning nothing. Just talking to and being around graduate students help acclimate you to what science is about. And when you take general physics and general chemistry and calculus, you have somebody you feel comfortable about talking about those things. We found here at UC Davis under an NSF grant that was funded for $1 million for 5 years, that increased the performance of underrepresented minority students by 1 grade point average. The university is continuing the program, but of course they couldn't do it just for minority students because of Proposition 209 here in the state of California. But it serves as an example of what you can do.
Hey, Bill, let me get some other questions in here. Ponch, I saw your hand raised. And by the way, Bill, I would point out to all board members, what you're saying is there's a good article in the latest edition of Chemical and Engineering News on science identity and what you're talking about, taking students in the lab, letting them see themselves, whether they're chemists, engineers, physicists. Ponch?
And Vic, let me just suggest that Ponch be the last question.
Okay.
I mean, I know we could go on all day. We will continue the conversation later. I just want to make sure we get to the rest of our business.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen and Vic. Let me tell you, I'm a new director of NSF for the panel members who may not know. I was sworn in on July 2nd. First of all, I want to say to Kelly, I'm sorry for your experience, and you can be rest assured that I'll be thoroughly looking into this with my team. And already our OIRM head, Vauncey Gardner, will reach out to you, Kelly, to find out what happened. Because I want, and I can assure you this, I want NSF to be a welcoming and a safe experience for all visitors. And this is, so I cannot tell you how sorry I am from the bottom of my heart. So I hope you will take that as on behalf of NSF. On behalf of NSF, I'm very grateful for all your comments today, your ideas, your suggestions for doing better, much better. We have a long way to go, and we are going to work together to make it much better. And I can give you my word on that. I resonate with many of your comments. In the interest of time, I'm going to say, even taking, for example, Dr. DeLoatch's comment, that call for action that we need to better to engage our whole domestic talent. I'm fully on board with that. I've talked about this. You will see my comments that I've made in the many articles that have been talking about what my plans are. So Vision 2030 talks about it. And so this is something that we will take very seriously in terms of bringing up our domestic talent at scale, at speed, and across the geographies. So I just want to leave you with this thought. Just on Monday, in the first town hall I had, I announced the launch of a racial equity task force led by our ODI head. And I will tell you that this task force singularly, the purpose is to ensure all the barriers that will be identified and addressed at NSF. And that was my first direction to them, is to make sure that all barriers are identified and addressed. And so you have my word again on that, that we're going to work very hard at this. And this is a challenging problem. And thank you for pointing out not only the challenges, but also some ideas and suggestions. And we're going to take this and work on it. So again, thank you on behalf of NSF for your wonderful panel and your inputs today.
Thank you to our guest panelists, not only for participating in this important discussion, but also for leaving us with specific recommendations on how to address systemic marginalization of Black people in the area of science, in the science and engineering enterprise. Although our time was limited, this is just the beginning of the conversation. And I can assure you, this is just the beginning. And I can say also our chair will assure you, I can speak for her because I know she feels passionately about this, that I know the board will turn into action and our fellow board members. As we transition into the Vision 2030 and individual committee sessions, I encourage you to consider what was said here and allow it to inform your actions go forward. And I will also say what you just heard from the director. I've only known him for 4 years, but what I've known about him, he is a person of action, and whatever he says, for all you panel members and our board members, you can take it to the bank. So I know that with this partnership, we will get this done. I thank you all again, as well as our participants, for this incredible session. And I turn this back over to the chair.
Thank you, Vic. And let me add my deep thanks to Bill, Stephanie, Stephon, Jean, and Kelly for your time, your wisdom, your perspective, and your call to action. And I do hope we can continue to engage with you all as we move forward with our own efforts on this important issue. And thank you very much to Victor and also to Portia Flowers in the NSBO office for putting together this amazing panel for us today.